So yes, so where is Gosport, if my slides will work?
The question we all ask ourselves.
Yes, note the red arrow. I think Jenny has better slides on this very subject, but basically it is on the south coast, just across the harbour from Portsmouth, very near the Isle of Wight. And this second part of the slide shows where all of the Heritage Action Zone projects are within the borough of Gosport. So it's, what have I written here? Yeah, so there's a really rich military heritage in Gosport. It is the place where the Royal Navy had their munitions, where they had any of their victualling done. They brewed rum, they made chips, biscuits, they took in grain, they salted beef. That all happened on the Gosport side. But there's more recent heritage in the submarine service operated from Gosport before and during the First World War, and they were there until relatively recently. But as we all know, they're up in Faslane in not Gosport, in Glasgow now. The RAF had their earliest airfields in Gosport and in Lyon-le-Solent, which the Daedalus hangars, that's where they invented, developed and operated hovercraft from there. So it's very much a military town. That isn't all there is to it, but for the Gosport has, that's what it's focused on, rich military heritage. So a lot of my projects are military sites. The Royal Navy are moving away from places like Gosport. They prefer places like Faslane, where they can build the training facilities that they need, quite frankly, where you know, and they pour a lot of resources into that, and it's all about operating as a modern Royal Navy. Lots of the sites in Gosport, some of them are from the 18th century, and that is just no longer what they need. So we're going to take a look at some of those sites, because for the Royal Navy, if it's not operational, it's not of any interest to them anymore. It's prime land by the sea, and it's something, you know, that they sell off land to create funding to do other things with. So we're going to look at some of the things that are my sort of biggest conundrums, because they are on MOD sites that nobody who isn't in the military is allowed to go onto. And the first one is this. It's on Gosport's skyline. If you came into Portsmouth and crossed on the ferry, you would see this, the submarine escape training tower. You wouldn't necessarily know what it was. And as you can see, it's not particularly pretty. But reclad in the 1980s, it's very beige, sort of greeny, sort of looking a bit dirty now. But basically, it's a very interesting 100 foot of water, like a massive test tube. So it's very interesting, but doesn't have too many other obvious reuses. And the Royal Navy just don't need it anymore. It was built because submariners needed to go from about, if your submarine sank, from about 100 foot down, and you needed to get yourself up to the surface with your own lungs. There are ways to do this, and that's what they train people in. And it's a very dangerous operation, but really, really important at that time. They do things completely differently now, because submarines go much lower than 100 foot. So as somebody told me just on Sunday, if your submarine sinks, you're just going to stay there and die. And I was like, oh, how attractive. How that convinces anybody to join the submarine service, I do not know. But anyway, but that's today's reality. But this lovely building is Grade 2 listed. There must be some other use for it. It's fascinating. People love to go in there and see it. It is, when you're at the top, which is what this sort of blue circle is, that's looking down into it. And it is just really fascinating. However, it only just seems to have this sort of storytelling aspect to it. We're doing some submariner oral history at the moment to capture some of those stories. But well, it needs a new use. So we will come to that in a moment. Hold that in your mind, because our next place is Fort Rowner. This picture over here is Fort Rowner from Google. This is actually Fort Brockhurst, because Fort Rowner is one of 3 identical Palmerston forts, which were built mid 19th century to guard against landward attack. So for not for sea attack, it's very much for land. The circle on the end, that's the keep of last resort. And then the rest of it going round, that there'd be just gun emplacements from there. And as you can see, it's like brick built with earthworks on top of it. And that's the same all the way around. So 2 of the 3 are still on MOD land. They make up part of HMS Sultan, which is still very much an active air-sea training facility. It's very difficult to get onto Fort Rowner because it's still a kind of live training facility. You know, they don't allow anybody who isn't training there to go on there. So you have to go by special invitation of the commanding officer. And the commanding officer changes every 2 years. So it depends on what their particular interest is. If they're interested in heritage, then they're quite happy to show you around. But if they're not interested in heritage, then it's not a priority. As the last commanding officer said to me, there is no place for this kind of fort in a modern Royal Navy. And I think, you know, you can see that for yourself, really. So one of the ring of forts has been knocked down and it bankrupted the company. So there is no developer gain in buying something like this and knocking it down. You've got to do something with it unless you're going to leave it to fall down, which for the Heritage Access Zone is not an option. They suffer from lots of problems. There is excessive problems with damp, water seepage. There are no services. There's no Wi-Fi. You'd never get Wi-Fi through those walls, to be perfectly honest. And there's no modern access. Nothing bigger than a Mini could probably actually get onto the site. Although on Fort Rowner, they did sort of punch a hole through the side of it so you can get caravans through. I don't know what it is with the Royal Navy, but you get to a point and you must buy a caravan or a camper van and then park it on MOD sites. There's a lot of caravans on their sites. And this is a picture of their flock of sheep who look after the grass, because it's very steep and it's very difficult to look after. But you also get an impression of all the ivy that they're allowing to grow on it, and buddleia and all sorts. It's just a really difficult place to manage. And my third and final one is even harder to show you. Browndown First World War practice trenches. I have been told that these are the best preserved First World War training trenches in the country. That's according to Historic England. They are textbook from the officers' training manual of the First World War. These are textbook trenches. So we have no documentation, but Historic England believes that, you know, new soldiers were brought here just to dig and know how to dig. And when you got to the front, you'd know how to make a new trench because you practiced it all here. I have to stand here, but you can see there's a little sort of castellated line this way and another one going up that side. And you know, that's kind of, you know, classic frontline trench warfare, and you can see the communication trenches coming out from that. And then there's just other little bits elsewhere where they've dug and practiced, and, you know, so they are quite extensive. This is the best way to see them in January to March. Yes, you can barely see it, that is true. But there is there you go, it kind of goes around that way. It is there, not as deep as they used to be. But the bracken preserves them in many ways. If we took the bracken off, probably the rain would wash them away because it's quite sandy soil quite near the coast. So they are beautifully preserved by the vegetation that prevents you from seeing them. That's one of the hardest parts of this. So that's the end of my presentation. And now I have something for you to do. What would you do if you have these sites? You really need people to appreciate them, to understand them, to feel like they have some ownership over them, and therefore prepared to fight for their survival. But you can't take anybody onto them. So you can't take anybody anywhere near them, or like Browndown. I could take you to Browndown, but this time of year you wouldn't see anything but bracken. It would just be, it would feel very underwhelming. So I have some pictures for you, and kind of want to split them into 3 groups, but maybe I'll do table by table, and you might have to swap your pictures with somebody else who also has the set Fort Round or Browndown. But yeah, I want you to consider, if you don't mind, do you think it's worth keeping? Because you're welcome to say it's not worth keeping. And how would you raise awareness of it? And if you feel like you're doing my work for me, you are in many ways. I am fresh out of ideas on what to do. So if anybody suggests something that actually I think is really workable, I will give it a go. I'll write about it in SHCG news or journal and let you know how it goes. So let me bring you some pictures. Get your thinking caps on, please.
And can I just say, the paper of Gosport saying you got.
Okay, everybody. I hope you've all had a good discussion. That wasn't me. So we have our roving mics, but I'd quite like to hear a little bit from each table about anything you talked about, even if it wasn't like the newest idea you've ever had. So maybe could we start with this table? Who had the set? Thank you.
So we had the submarine escape tower, and we were talking about a couple of different things. So we talked quite a lot about where you could see the tower from and putting interpretation in those places. So there's a submarine museum nearby, but also are there spots in Gosport in the centre or across in Portsmouth where you can actually see the tower and having some kind of, whether it's a digital thing you can scan or physical interpretation on the floor or there, but so that, because it's very visible, but that doesn't mean people know what it is. So it's a bit like an office block.
Yeah.
So trying to encourage people to know what it is they're looking at. And then we had quite a long discussion about what, if at the point the Navy moved out, what it could be. And we all kind of felt like there should be an opportunity to do diving in it, or the people, but it would be, can you find a commercial company who would want to do that to raise the money and do it in a heritage sensitive way?
Yeah.
But that probably felt like the most likely to save the building, because trying to just do it for heritage, you know, unlikely to be able to get the funding to do the amount of upkeep to keep a tank of water that size.
Yeah, you're right. That is the issue. Is running it like as a swimming pool. But they cost a lot of money. But you're right in thinking that heritage needs to be mixed with that commercial thing, because it's kind of everything has to wash its own face now. So no, I think you're right to think in that kind of way. So that was really helpful. Thank you. Could we go to another side? Let's go to Steph and Jude's table.
We had the thought rounder, and yeah, this was quite a tricky one, but we were kind of struck by the fact there's the moat and nice green space around the outside. So we probably wouldn't be allowed to do this, but we were quite keen on building sort of some kind of a walkway. Steph was using the example of kind of in Swansea, the Associated British Ports have kind of worked with the town to kind of create a walkway that creates access through and around. We were thinking, you know, then it could link to like the natural heritage around it. You could do, I don't know how it would work, sort of bio blitzes, but you wouldn't be able to get right up in things. So you might have to do some of it digitally, remotely, but linking it to kind of rewilding in the moat and the fishing. And then we were also thinking about a digital kind of 3D reconstruction of the fort as it was in the Palmerston's time. And thinking that could be quite a useful engagement tool for the MOD as well, because looking at kind of military history seems to be something that's quite often incorporated into military training. Having worked with the military on First World War projects, they're quite keen on that side of things.
Yeah.
But then also, you know, when they're going to do their recruitment engagement, pop up things in market squares, and they can take that as something to engage public with as well. And we were thinking about, you know, could potentially get local colleges who've got games design or 3D design programs involved in the design of that.
And I think University of Portsmouth do have that. Actually, I think one of my colleagues there their son's gone off to do that. Actually, maybe I should ask them. They've gone off to do game designing, and that was locally. I don't think it was. Maybe it was University of Portsmouth, but no, good keyword there. I'll note that one. Thank you. And then the group at the back.
That'll be 2,000 quid.
Yeah, yeah, right. Yeah, that thought. I'll invoice you.
Hi, we had round down trenches and we're thinking similarly to Jude's type 3D mapping it and reproducing it digitally and having like that legacy for it. I mean, there's very little to see now, and that's not going to get any easier and actually trying to keep it or preserve it or take it back to its original state is just not a goal really, because it would just be so intense. So I think it's going to have to go back to nature.
Yeah.
But it could well be, I mean, it may well be a great ecosystem already, so there may be good arguments for that in and of itself.
Yeah.
I also wondered as well in terms of community engagement, whether you could, I mean, with my community arts hat on, whether you could actually, rather than just focusing on history of it, actually get an artist involved, creative writer or a visual artist, so that what they made would be a legacy for it alongside any historical preservation of it digitally. And that would allow you to involve the local community in some way.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was our thought. So I'm listening. I also suggested you might want to try and get it pinned on Google Maps.
Yes. Yes.
So that everyone would know where it was, even if they couldn't get to it.
Yes. Yeah. No. Thank you. Actually, I quite like the creative artist idea. I hadn't really thought about that, but that could give it a very different kind of interpretation that doesn't necessarily have to be there. That could be on the HAS website and any other promotional stuff that we do just around the HAS or around the legacies of HAS. So that can be kept. It doesn't have to be, on a post right next to the trenches. So
absolutely, and it would allow some of those really difficult. I mean,
yeah.
Why would you want to visit somewhere where the last few days of somebody's life potentially was spent digging a hole?
Military people love it though, because it's quite classic. But no, I see what you mean. That there are other shades, aren't there, than just that pure military shade.
Yeah.
I'm just going to butt in before Steph, because it reminds me in our group when we were talking about the tower, we wondered about whether you could project onto it or you could project from it in some kind of arty, creative way.
I could see having that conversation with them for sure. Yeah, because it doesn't require any intervention really. We might even be able to do that from the highway, in fact. So.
Just to add to that. With Pembrokeshire in Wales, there are some other training trenches, and a few years ago, the 1914-18 Now project commissioned an artist called Mark Rees to do a large performance piece based actually around the First World War and into other conflicts that Wales was involved with. And one of the film installation was a sort of key chap working his way around the slip trenches that still survive in Pembrokeshire.
Right.
So you could, a performance piece in those trenches would be quite viable. And an artwork, a video artwork, which just give some legacy.
No, lovely. No, so it's always good to have an example to refer to. So that's grand. Thank you. So shall we carry on with trenches and go to the back group there? Somebody did make a lovely suggestion from there, so I know there's something on that table.
We have quite similar thoughts, really. We've quite taken the idea of rewilding. There are sort of similar sites to the Orphan Nest. That was a military site, which has now kind of been left to nature. And because these sites have been sort of disturbed through firing, but undisturbed, it doesn't actually have quite unique ecosystems. We like the idea of having a boardwalk to make it obviously safe so no one falls in any trenches, and so people can kind of walk around and engage with the wildlife. We also like the idea of having drone footage. People are quite into big jet and watching like aerial footage of places, so the drone could kind of go under and people can see the drone. So yeah, we thought there was some potentials for this site. Anyone else have anything to want to add? Yeah.
Lovely, thank you. No, the boardwalk idea, it would be quite hard to dig posts into it, but where there's a will, there's a way. It would be quite nice to actually walk yourself over it. I think there is Historic England drone imagery, whether it's publicly accessible or not, but I can always ask them, could we make it accessible? And I think that could make all the difference, really, to how people can engage with the trenches. Thank you. So how about the middle table there? I can't remember what you had. Did you have Ragnar?
We had Ragnar, yeah. So when we looked at this photograph with the arches, well, the first thing that popped into my mind was kind of maker spaces and small businesses, which might be a sort of dreadful middle class fantasy weekend thing. But
that's good for Gosport. It makes a change.
So, but taking a step back, can't take the public to the site. So it seems to me you have to take some sort of, you have to try and take the site to the public by perhaps getting a series of documenting the site photographically, getting a really good high quality 3D tour made. But Museum of Liverpool, we just have a tour made, a video tour made of one of our galleries to be installed, and then use that. Your colleague was saying there's a housing estate across the road from the site. The site's probably not that far actually from Gosport. Start with the people that are right across the road and start by asking them, if this site were to become publicly accessible, what would you want from this site? And then, you know, fan out to the rest of Gosport, because these sites are only viable if people, if they offer something people want.
Absolutely.
So my middle class fantasy maker unit is maybe utterly useless.
I don't think so, actually.
So it's obviously not, you know, not the first person to say, oh, ask people what they want, but it seems to us that's really where you have to start. And it may be that the upkeep is just not sustainable, and you know, it's just too difficult a site to maintain. But I think you have to start by seeing what people want from it, and that, you know, that might involve making suggestions to them as well. You know, that they can reject out hand or not, but they have to be able to see it. And if they can't go there, the only way is to take it from them.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Okay. We also wondered whether or not they do any sort of annual open days or anything.
They do heritage open days if the commanding officer wants that, which they usually do, because heritage open days is quite well thought of. In Gosport. So yeah, they do that. Yeah, they do have their own little guides, but yeah, it's just they'll only do the weekends as well, so it's only 1 or 2 weekends a year, which is such a pity. But yeah, but maybe the video idea would be the best way to sort of kind of at least document it in its current dilapidated glory before it is a bit of a wreck, really, because you know it does have lots of engineering and seepage problems. So
it's hard to see the potential just from some photographs. So I think if you can actually feel like you're walking through the site, you've got a better chance of visualizing it and then know what about this. So we haven't got X, we've no access to X. Why don't we make?
Yeah, that's lovely.
And I think the other thing we'll also touched on real like rewinding braces. Slow decay.
Yes.
Documented, but actually accept it.
Yeah. That isn't a success for Hans. But I do take your point. Thank you.
When you said dark and wet, it made me think that well,
yeah. Well, it's certainly got some stalactites in there. And the last but not least table.
Hello.
Hello.
So we have the amazing tower, which I think is amazing, and we definitely don't want to get rid of it. We, similar to someone else, we thought projecting on it. So I think with the store, I think our feeling was you could do a mixture of commercial and social history engagement with it. If you could work with artists, maybe incorporate some of the oral histories that you said that you were collecting, you could do amazing projections over the skyline if you could see it to tell that story. But then we thought we went much more expensive, and we thought you could have a VR suite somewhere nearby, wherever you could have it nearby, and make some virtual reality. You could do a day in the life of someone training on the site, so very much guided by the oral histories, kind of serious heritage engagement. But then you could also do some much more lurid, nasty things, like we were talking about the cursed submarine disaster. Well, that was me actually. I was talking about it. But and then we had to go, which was 22 years ago, to make a rocket.
Oh, okay.
But people will pay loads of money to come from miles around to encounter something like that, which is really grim, but it is true. So that might be how to get the commercial side of it going. Like if you had VR, it costs an awful lot to do and to make it happen. But you could tell stories in so many different ways to engage different audiences. I think it does have commercial potential.
Yeah.
And then once you get the site, we were talking about turning it into a swimming pool or a diving pool, but you'd obviously still need the VR to keep going, to keep it financially viable.
Yeah.
On a serious note, aside from swimming pools, whether it was possible to sort of make a replica in some way to give a sense of the size and scale, whether you were able to go in that and use that as a way of interpretation. But also it made me wonder, because I've actually got a colleague who was in the Royal Navy for a long time now, works in museums, whether there's a Navy equivalent of the Battlefield Trust, and I know they do a lot of talks and tours of sites, and obviously that's all like army and land focused. But I don't know if there's such a Navy or air equivalent, and whether that would be something a bit tapped into Heritage Open Days type thing, if you've got people willing to do talks and tours when it's safe to do that. Maybe that's another way that you could.
See, I don't know that there is a sort of Battlefield Trust for Navy, but I can always ask. I've never actually asked before, so maybe that's why I don't know. Yes, but I think that's a very worthy question that's worth asking of somebody who knows better than me. So thank you. No, that's really helpful. Lovely, thank you all very much. Actually, that was really inspiring, and so I certainly have at least half a dozen ideas to take back and see what I can make work. I will keep you posted. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Michelle. And now we've got Jenny's presentation. If I opened it. It's gone, Jenny. It's gone. Let's go back to the folder.
It was very interesting you saying about Navy and the caravans and the camper vans, because think about it, my dad always used to go on about wanting a camper van, and I think it's an obsession with sleeping in a tin can.
It makes me feel at home.
Small tin spaces.
Come on, computer, wakey wakey. We haven't gone to sleep, but the computer has, apparently. Bear with. Share screen. That one. Share.
My favourite.
Oh, that's not a happy affair.
Thank you, we're sorry. Oh, yeah, that's fine. Whilst we're just waiting for the usual, just to give a bit of background, I'm unusual in that I actually was born and grew up in the town that I'm going to be talking about, and we all know that it's very rare within our world to actually end up working where you were born. So I am a Navy brat. My father was Fleet Air Arm for 23 years. I'm one of 4 children, all 4 of us born in a different part of the country based around naval bases. And my dad was sent to HMS Daedalus back in 1964, and I came along a few years later. So I grew up in Gosport, went off eventually to university, worked various places. Then I came back and worked. I was the archaeologist for Portsmouth for 7 years before I moved over to Hampshire. So I've got the Portsmouth background knowledge and also the Gosport history knowledge. And Gosport's an interesting town in that it is utterly dominated by its naval heritage, same as Portsmouth is, but equally lots of people within the town have never actually been in the Navy. However, a huge amount of the population have done roles that were related to the Navy and providing services in some form to the military. So there's a huge amount of expertise there in terms of light engineering and things like that. People coming out of the Navy looking for jobs. So historically, there was a lot of factories and light engineering factories in the town, which employed people coming out of the Navy, and the whole surrounding area. Actually, we used to have Plessy's, Marconi's, as it was called now, JUC and places like that, and other big firms. So it's
not going well, sorry.
Don't worry.
I'm not doing anything different to what I've been doing all day, but apparently it just doesn't want to do it on the screen. It's working on Zoom, so Zoom is sharing, but the screen is not sharing.
But anyway, I'll talk a little bit more about.
We can always send the presentation round if you want to. It's there for you.
It's very strange. Is it? Was that because of us trying to sort out the things earlier?
No,
with,
keep talking, Jenny. We'll send the presentation around to everyone.
Right. So, as part of basically very tied in with what work that Michelle's been doing, the military is pulling out of a large amount of Gosport, whereas before they had a number of bases in the town. They have slowly been pulling out over the last few years, and so there's these huge military bases that are now going to be unused or available to go back into civilian use. And it sort of coincided. Gosport's had a problem as an area of deprivation for a large number of years now, for various different reasons, partly to do with its history and as a naval base, and other reasons as well. And so it's a town that's often seen as problematic. And the awful thing is, if you Google Gosport, you often get, and you get to often get questions that people ask. And one that often pops up is Gosport rough? It's parts of it are. So it tends to have this reputation. It even got into Parliament. Someone actually wrote to Jeremy Corbyn when he was Labour leader and said, I live in Gosport and I'm too terrified to walk down my town centre. What's the government going to do about it? So it has developed this reputation over the years. And the people who live there are actually very, very proud of it. And so you do have to be careful about what you say about the town, because their backs will go up. And typical of naval port, they're tough people as well. Part of another project we've been working on, I was talking to an artist last year, and I said, it's a town that sometimes feels that things have been done to it rather than it's been given a choice about what it wants to have happen to it. So when we came to thinking about the possibility of refurbishing the old museum building, we very much wanted to bring the community into this to actually involve them and get their say on it. The building itself, that is Gosport Museum and Art Gallery, started life as the technical school and free library at the start of the 20th century. And it very quickly became an actual school, and eventually the grammar school moved into it for a number of years, and we would still occasionally get people that went there in its final years before it became so big it was moved to another site. So it's got a long history. It sits at the top of the high street. People are very aware of it. Back in around 2005, Hampshire County Council, who own the site at this point, along with the Gosport Borough Council, decided that they were going to create a discovery centre in Gosport. And what that meant was they were going to close the museum that had been in that building since 1975 and move a display over into the library. And then they created a local studies area in the former museum building. So you had local studies in the front, and at the back of it, Hampshire County Council ran its schools education service with museums called Search. So that took up a huge amount of space. It has room set up. So we had a 1950s room, a Victorian room, things like this, and then a geology room. And that, along with it, the old library was then turned into a government indemnified gallery for travelling exhibitions. So it'd been this real mix of a building since about 2005. Then a few years ago, Hampshire County Council decided it wanted to save money, and it wanted to move all the library service back into the library building, which is literally on the other side of the precinct. And this was going to free up the rooms that used to be the museum, So they came to Hampshire Cultural Trust and said, do you want your museum back? Would you like to turn it into something? We'll give you some money. So for the last 4 or 5 years, really, there's been this conversation going on between different partners as to what could be done. And of course, a lot of work was done to bring funders up. And if I could show you the list of funders, I would. But a lot of work has taken place. But between our fundraising people and Hampshire County Council and Gosport Borough Council, we've managed to raise money. Excuse me, I have to take my glasses off to see this. We've got funding now from Historic England through the High Street Heritage Action Zone, part of the project. Arts Council England have been throwing money at Gosport because of the perceived problems. Gosport Borough Council, Hampshire County Council, Hampshire Cultural Trust, we put time and money into it. The Foyle Foundation, the Friends of Gosport Museum gave us money from a legacy that they've been left, and a number of private donors, including they've been doing a tag a tile project where you could sponsor a floor tile that's going to go into the courtyard. That's raised quite a significant amount of money. People get their names or loved ones' names printed onto them. So as I said, what we wanted to do in order to create the new displays was actually talk to the people of Gosport and give them a chance to actually have their say. We put a project brief out to tender, and a company called Hara Clark actually won this, and that was to do the display and design it, but also to do the consultation work with the community. A lady called Kate Hume came on board as a freelancer that works with them. So last summer was really spent working with Kate, with a number of community groups, doing handling workshops. So we would choose objects, we would take them along to those workshops and get people to talk about those objects and how it made them feel. Prior to this, I'm trying to sort of think it without the slides, we'd actually come together a series of themes. Myself and Wendy, who is the current venue manager, who's also Gosport born and bred, we came up with some basic themes to actually fit those stories around, but then we really let different community groups work on those themselves. And rather than work with the normal standard museum visitor, we actually tried to bring in some people who normally would not be seen as your average museum visitor or would have barriers to visiting us. So we worked with a group called Volunteeros, which are adults with mental health issues, have for one reason or another fallen out of everyday life, struggled to work, struggled to socialise with people, but they come together in this group called Volunteeros and really just have a chat, and they were brilliant. We gave them objects based around Gosport's role within wider national events, because being this massive naval town, it's always had a big role in things. D-Day, for instance, massive importance in D-Day. And whilst we were doing this work, we were thinking about the fact that we were coming up to the 40th anniversary of the Falklands conflict, which we've just been commemorating, which had a massive impact on Gosport, and it's very difficult. I was a teenager, and what started as a laugh very quickly became a really serious issue. You know, you had school friends whose fathers were being literally blown up, and it had a massive impact on the town. So we used those objects to actually draw out stories. And we also had things like, we've got a massive collection of royal memorabilia from the town and things like that. And they got to choose which objects they want to see in the displays. And they also wrote their own labels. So the language of the labels is very much the community groups. We also work with young children whose families are in the Navy, and what that normally means is you don't stay in any one place for very long. They're not quite as bad as the army, but still tend to move around quite a bit. So often again they struggle at school. And we did sport with them, and they chose some objects. And interestingly, small boys, why do you like that object? Because it smells funny. They loved the leather football because of the smell, but we put it in because that's what they chose. We also worked with the U3A group locally, who had a certain amount of knowledge themselves. They have a history group, but they wanted to work with a group of youngsters, and we had some teenagers, a group called Loud and Proud, again, teenagers who, for one reason or another, struggling at school and life, and they formed a group, all really lovely kids, and we put them together, and they chose retail and the changes in the high street. So we had a lovely collection from the 80s of someone had gone down the high street and had actually got a load of bags from the shops in the high street back in the 80s that we've actually got. So getting those out, and then Joyce from the U3A walked down the high street with these teenagers, and we said, well, that was where that was. That unbelievably, one of the shops still exists. The Cottage Loaf Bakery is still there. So, you know, and it's talking about how the high street has changed. And also it led to very interesting conversations around design and the use of bags, because a lot of them were still paper, and there was a very early plastic one there. And they were saying, well, why did you change to plastic? And we went, we don't know. The big bad mistake we made in the late 70s, early 80s. So what we will have now is a series of stories that have been chosen by these different groups. We've worked with a group of young interns, again, young people that for one reason or another aren't doing very well at school. One lad, he's a selective mute. He's never said a word to any of us. He's only 19. He's the most brilliant researcher, and he's written quite a lot of the text. And I did a fact check, and then a couple of other people have done. But actually, it's amazing, and it's just, you think, oh God, he could go and do a history degree so easily, but he's just got to get beyond that point. So it's a work in progress at the moment. I was in the museum building on Monday. There are builders all over the place, and we are hoping it's all going to come together in October. Will actually come on display. So there will be the usual thing. We will have the cafe and the shop. We will still have our art gallery with different art exhibitions in. Search is still in some parts of it, doing schools projects. And then we will have a museum display. And the central part will be more permanent. And we've sort of chosen those objects to represent some of the more constant stories. And then surrounding those will be the community stories. But like someone else was saying, I think it was like we were saying with Barnsley, the hope is we will change those every so often, as different groups will be able to come through and actually choose their stories and choose their objects.
Thank you very much.
I'm sorry about that.
We're delighted to have Ros Currie with us this afternoon. Ros is passionate about working with communities to hear their stories and ensure that their narratives become part of the wider world. She's been curator at the Jewish Military Museum, the Jewish Museum London and Islington Museum, and is now director of Wycombe Museum. In this presentation, she's going to look at how heritage can be part of a capital project, the challenges of engaging with communities versus those with power and money, and the small ways in which we can make sure the heritage of a site is not forgotten.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Oh, it's so exciting to be at the Social History Curators Group conference. I love the Social History Curators Group. They're the best. Even if I'm not a curator anymore, I still love them. Okay, so I'm going to talk about Holloway Prison, which is a project I started on in 2016, and honestly, I don't think I'll ever stop doing it because unfortunately I got fully enmeshed and can't escape. So then these pictures are Holloway Prison as it first was when it was built in 1852, and then it was rebuilt from 1970 to 1985, and that's the modern building after the closure in 2016. So that's the history bit, because I'm talking about regeneration, that's kind of all you get. So my talk really is about what happens when a prison closes, when something like this disappears out the community. And I guess the thing to start with is the project that we did on Holloway Prison. So we did this project because I worked at Islington Heritage, that was the local history museum for Islington. And the people of Holloway Prison, the former prisoners, but everyone else who worked in a prison, because as you can imagine, a community of over 500 women were held at Holloway. Huge number of people also worked there. And that was a community it was really difficult to tap into. We were actually talking about prisons in the break a little bit, but it's so hard to get into prison, so to speak, as a curator and support people in telling those stories. So I was really passionate that we got in and we captured some of that before it all went away, because this was a major prison being closed. So this was a project. I've just put our aims up. So we wanted to collect the story of Holloway through objects, oral history and creative outputs, to connect with all these different groups, particularly former prisoners, but also prison officers, other civilian workers, charities, activists, everyone really, and have a community of volunteers who collaborated on the project. The project was brilliant. I loved it. It was fascinating. It was fantastic. It was really, really hard at times. We ended up having a psychotherapist on the project who was a volunteer because we needed it, because some of the stories were so hard. But that's not actually what I'm talking about today. It's just the background to why I got into this, basically. And it was really complex. We had so many intersecting stories. It was properly postmodern in that there isn't one truth at all of Holloway Prison. There's multiple different truths. And we did change people's minds by telling these stories. We created empathy in the public for prisoners, which was amazing. Like, it genuinely was amazing. And I just wanted to kind of talk a little bit about objects, because this is a social history curators group, right? And so this is one of, I should have given a trigger warning. I'm really sorry. Just this is really quite emotional, this quote that I'm about to play. So I'll give you a moment if you don't want to hear it. It's not really awful, but it's just, it kind of captures the emotion of the prison, I guess. Oh, no, I've just prepared you for that and then press the wrong button. Okay.
The doors, so many doors, because you know, like when you watch a horror film, yeah, and they go, everything happens at a mental institution, doesn't it? And in a mental institution, it's all corridors and doors, and there's always something frightening happening behind that door or on that corridor. That's what it reminds me of, a mental institution. I could see into the garden with the bars and stuff. But I don't think I really ever got to look at my window. I don't think I really wanted to see what was really outside. I couldn't see beyond that. I think that was giving me too much hope. I think I had to get my head down, that I had to do this sentence and try and survive in it the best way I could. Because there's a difference of perception of a person's outside and what you're managing internally is completely different. And internally I was completely broken. Do you know what I mean? And I felt that I was not allowed to show that as an inmate because I had to be tough. So I was crying, I was frightened, I didn't want to pick a fight. I was quite happy to walk away from a fight. There was an incident with a woman with kettle.
I'm going to just stop it because she does go on and on, but it just captures these. That's from an oral history. So these are the oral histories we're recording, and they really were people's personal experiences. And a lot of them had talked about their crime, what they'd done, with loads of different people. So that was off pat, but they'd not actually talked about their experience with prison at all. And it's such a traumatic experience. We ended up as kind of pseudo therapists, giving space for people to just say what they wanted with no judgment. So the relationships you build up, as I'm sure loads of you know, when you're doing oral histories, is very close. And that means when you then leave a project, when a project closes, those relationships don't just go away. And it's one of the major problems we have with the way heritage is funded in this country. What happens next? This is me in the middle, looking very young, with some of the former prisoners we worked with, our artist. I've chopped the mayor of Islington off the frame, so the deputy mayor of Islington is there. Well, he's a man, so I just got rid of him, but that's not why really. He just didn't fit. So the project was massively emotionally freighted, and the other thing that happened was the prison was a place of home for people. So Anise, who you just heard speaking, that was the first person she ever had stability. So even though she was so scared, you heard that, she was so devastated when the prison closed because there wasn't that home for her to go back to if she broke the law again. And the project became a space for people to say goodbye to the prison. So what I'm saying is there was a lot of emotion, and that connection meant that I really felt a kind of responsibility. And so I didn't know what to do. So the first thing I did, there was a women's building group. So part of the idea of what was going to happen, sorry, I missed the bit when the prison was closed in 2015. The announcement was it was closed in 2016. The government says it was because they were closing Victorian prisons, which were no longer fit for purpose. And the first prison to close was Holloway Prison, which was actually built from 1970 to 1985. But it's a central London site, 12 acres of central London site, very, very worth awful lot of money. And also, there's a lot of liquidity in the women's prison estate. What that means is you can move women around more easily because there's fewer of them. So closing Pentonville would be really difficult. And also it's a grade 1 listed building, Pentonville. So if they close it, they can't knock it down. But Holloway, they could knock down and they could just move the women. So it's much easier to, I don't work for Islington Council anymore, I can say all of this without worry. It was much easier just to close the women's building. So a women's building group kind of came about because they wanted to lobby for some legacy for women on the site of so much suffering for women. So I supported the women's group in meeting. We gave them free meeting space basically in the museum. We've got a learning room. It wasn't a big deal, but obviously I was still working for the council, so it was a slightly complex relationship because I was a curator who'd worked this project, developed all these personal relationships, but still was a council employee, the council being the planning department who were kind of putting into place the plans for what would happen next in Holloway. So it was complicated, and you definitely saw the challenge of very different partners in this thing. We had an argument in one of the meetings about what former prisoners should be called. A lot of them call themselves inmates or former inmates, which is quite kind of what's the word, institutional language. So we normally said former prisoners because it was more kind of accessible. But some of the Islington women, some of whom are very much, as you might imagine, like very middle class, very wealthy, didn't want to say the word prisoner at all. And it's like, come on, that's their reality. You can't deny that. And then there was quite a lot of challenge with some of these groups who do lovely community stuff locally, being very uncomfortable with former prisoners, as you can imagine, because some of them are really scary. But actually, what's the point of a women's building on the site of a former women's prison if you don't make sure there's lots of space for former prisoners? So it was a challenging group to be part of. The Peabody consultation, when it started, oh, sorry, I missed that bit as well. Peabody bought the site in collaboration with London Square, and basically it sold for a lot less than it was expected to because Islington Council put these I'm really doing this talk back to front, I'm sorry, put rules in place which meant that there had to be a women's building on site. It had to comply with heights of buildings regulations and all of that. So Peabody ended up being the people who were doing the consultation to work out what should happen on site. And the initial consultation was rubbish. It really was. They brought a really standard consultant who obviously works on lots of building sites in, and he just didn't know how to work with a community which had so many different agendas, so much emotional freight. It was really challenging. I then went on maternity leave for a year, and then I came back and they hadn't got anywhere at all, and except that they'd employed some new consultants. And the new consultants actually, it was my first meeting back of maternity leave on Zoom, said, this is what our plans for the women's building are. As people who've done this project, what's your comments? And my comment was, I don't really think you've thought about this, because on the site of Holloway Prison, what they wanted to do was put plaques into the ground to represent the prison. So in this lovely new housing estate where people have paid lots of money for the flats, put plaques in the ground. And I was like, okay, so you can have one for the entrance, fine. What's the next one you get? Are you going to put where women were hanged? Or are you going to put where women are buried? Because there's not nice cultural points in a prison that you can just stick in the ground. And they just hadn't thought it through. And I think because of that, and because the new consultants were really good, I kind of just pushed back a bit. And I said, I mean, I was being quite flippant. Should we have Myra Hindley House? It's a possibility. I mean, they really needed to be made to think about what it meant for the prisoners, the former prisoners, and how important a site it was to them, but also what it would mean for the people who were going to live there. I wouldn't live on that site personally, but a lot of people do want to, and that's okay. But you don't really want to be reminded of horror all the time in your daily life either. So it's not straightforward. Then they said, oh, well, let's just do the suffragettes, because the suffragettes were great. They're non-controversial, right? Which, yeah, we can have comments on that. But I mean, that's first of all to ignore the history of other remarkable people. So Oscar Wilde was actually held at Holloway very briefly. Constance Markovich, who was the first woman to be elected as MP to the House of Commons, never sat, but an amazing story. And you have people like Pat Arrowsmith, of Britain's first prisoner of conscience. There's these amazing people down history who are held at Holloway. So to just do the suffragettes doesn't do them a service. But also, there's all these people who also were held at Holloway, who maybe had horrendous lives, but their stories deserve to be told as well. And are you going to just get rid of all of them? Are you going to kind of, I don't know what the word is, like goodness wash all of those people who've had tough lives away? So anyway, so they were quite stuck. They didn't really know what to do. And I ended up talking to Islington Planning Department, and they were like, yeah, we don't know what to do. And I ended up working with someone in the planning department who was really scary, I have to say. And we put together a proposal to Peabody to say, look, there needs to be heritage specific consultation, which needs to be part of Peabody's plans. And we put together a proposal, and they gave me £12,000, which was for the heritage department actually, but I left halfway through, so then I just had to do it as a consultant in my non-spare time. But to actually really engage and really give space for because the former prisoners were particularly the ones who were being left behind, because some of them found it really difficult to articulate their needs. So it was about giving them support to talk about Holloway. And yeah, the outcome was that I wrote a report. So we did a massive consultation. We worked with former prisoners. We talked to them about potential plans, potential heritage. We talked to local people, we talked to community activists, we talked to former prisoner workers. And this is my report, it's actually available online. And really, it was a consultation. I didn't do that, I hired someone in to do the consultation. But it was a consultation looking at the potential for heritage and how it should be represented on the site of Holloway Prison, and how difficult that was, and acknowledging that, but saying there must be space for this. And this was my recommendations, which you probably can't read, but basically this went into the report. There should be a permanent display within the public realm that is accessible to all, telling the story and history of Holloway Prison. The stories of former prisoners must be included. You can talk about the footprint of the space a little bit. There should be a permanent artwork developed in collaboration with former prisoners, which reflect the true history of the prison. There's a plane tree which they're keeping, which should become a place of memory, a place of reflection for those who want to remember the prison in the public space. And particularly in the women's building, interpretation of the legacy should be developed between the women who use the space and future tenants, and the women's building garden should be another but more private place of memory. So these are my recommendations, and really excitingly, these were then put into the planning documents for Islington Council. So they're now a mandatory part of the planning application, which was amazing really, but it means that they have to do this. And it was really difficult, I have to say. We had to reject certain ideas. So the legacy of Holloway Prison in the women's building, some of the former prisoners who were very vocal wanted a museum in the women's building and wanted a replica of a cell in the women's building. And my feeling was that's not what the women's building was for. The women's building was really meant to be about supporting women not going into prison. That was what it was about. It was about giving women support in the community, which they should have in the community, which often they only get in prison. And putting a museum in there, which we're not sure who can access it because it might be a women's only space. It just doesn't, and putting a cell in there, which for some former prisoners was a really difficult thing to have to look at, and for some it was fine. I mean, there's lots of complicated questions there. So that's why we pulled that out of there and said, actually put that in the public realm where everyone can access it. And the women's building needs to be a negotiated space with the people who are actually there once it's finished being built in 2026. We can't define what's going into there now. So that was one of the arguments I had. And when we had other arguments, like one of the councillors really wanted to save a lot of the barbed wire of the site and put that up, and it's like, it really shows a misunderstanding of how you can represent the heritage in this space where people are going to live. And it's not an easy question at all, but that's what we were working with. It was really interesting. And these my points, I did have to concede some things. One of the concessions I made is that taken out of here was the right to some form of public goodbye session for the prison for former prisoners. So before it was being knocked down, then they would be able to do that. But what I did instead was ensure that the consultant was on my side, and they held that actually last month. So even if it's not in here, it did actually happen, because it's being stripped at the moment, the prison. So the outcomes, the report was adopted, woo, which was really exciting, because it means that those recommendations, the voices of women, have to be taken into account. And then I've also been able to continue to advocate for former prisoners, making sure their voices are heard, which is great. But the project is still massively problematic. This is a tweet from last week, which says, there is little faith in councillors, officers, or the planning inspector will respond to community concerns. And that's all about housing, and it's all about the space on site, and not very much about the heritage, because there's so many bigger problems that actually people are focused on that, they're not focused on the heritage. But the fact that that report exists and has gone in as part of the planning means we still have to worry about the heritage, of course, but the heritage is kind of, we've done that little tiny bit, so we've managed to secure that. Everyone's still really, really angry with the council, particularly on affordable homes, what affordable homes means, how much space is being given to different things, all of this kind of thing. And what's my learning from this? That we've got power and that we should use it, but you've got to be really, really, really determined, and you've got to be really brave, because it was really, really scary. When I was writing the report, the fights I had over that report, what I could put in it, what I couldn't put in, I've never experienced that in the heritage world. Everyone's quite nice, and we can normally have a negotiation. We were having proper arguments, and certain members of my management team, when I was no longer managed by them, were signing off the report before I allowed it to be signed off, so I had to unsign it off and then re-sign it off. It was difficult, but finding space to make a difference. I think Tony was really interesting this morning. It's the same story, really, isn't it? It's where we can have these conversations with people who actually have power, who actually have money, and how we can work our way in and make them do what we want, essentially, or rather what we feel our communities need. I don't know how much time I've got left. I've no idea. 2 minutes. Oh, I'm quite well timed. But ensure the consultations are meaningful. We ended up having extra consultations because we hadn't got the right people in the first consultations, and that was really stressful, but it was really, the conversations were really remarkable in the end. And yeah, obviously consultations are frustrating because you can't talk to everyone, but at least we talked to a representative group of people. And then obviously you all agree heritage is important, and be wary of your own ego. I had to be really aware why I was doing this, and I was doing this because I care about the voices of the former prisoners, but I had to make sure that that was at the heart of why I was doing it. I wasn't doing it because I was getting paid to write a shiny report for anyone, and honestly I don't think anyone reading that report is going to want to hire me to write a report for them, because it's quite hard. It's quite like, yeah, and it's not a nice report that planners will want me to write more of, but I think it does what it needed to do, and prejudices, of course. Thank you. If you want to read the report, it's on the, I don't know why you would, it's only 31 pages long as well, though. I made it nice and short. It's on the website of Holloway Prison Consultation. We do have a website for the project. It's quite out of date now, and unfortunately COVID meant we didn't finish some of the stuff, but you can email me if you want to know more. Thank you very much.
So I think it's the down button. There you go.
Thank you very much, Emma. Thanks so much. Yeah, thank you. I'm going to talk to you about the bunker. We've seen all these marvelous projects today. This is it's the smallest museum we're talking about today. It's also the newest museum. It's not even a museum that's open to the public. So why are you talking about it, Alistair? Well, it's important, really. Emma mentioned the first most important thing there. Prevention first. It's a place where children can be taught about three things. They can be taught about local history, they can find out about the work of the police, and we can feed in a little bit of STEM education as well. Ros mentioned earlier on that it's really difficult to get into a prison. These are the guys that can help. Okay, so we do a lot of work with the police. This is how. Prevention first. What is prevention first? I'll get to that in a moment. But first, a little bit of scene setting. Welling Hatfield in the county of Hertfordshire sits right on top of Greater London. I'm not going to pretend it's a hotbed of crime in the general context. It's terribly middle class. It's the home counties, chaps. You know, it's rather commuter belt and so forth. But two towns. Welling and Hatfield, that's why it's called Welwyn Hatfield, really. Welwyn Garden City is about 100 years old. It's one of the first garden cities. Hatfield, it's had a lot of development since then. Hatfield is predominantly post-war and grew up, as we'll see, around a specific industry. Crime-wise, in general, like I say, I'm not going to compare. There's no point in comparing it to the nation as a whole. But just for the sort of county-wide comparison, for all crime, it's just a bit above the average, really, for the county as a whole. One or two areas particularly relevant to young people, which we're talking about here. It's pretty bad for bicycle theft, but the moral of that story is don't park your bike in Watford if you expect to see it back again, of course. Ditto drugs. And come to that in a second, and also things like knife crime and possession of weapons. Now, this brings us back to prevention first, really, because remember that slide that showed you where Hertfordshire is relative to London. It's directly to the north of London. It is an absolute prime target for county lines drug running, whereby drug dealers from London and the metropolitan area will come up. It's got great rail links to Hertfordshire, and they'll come up and they'll use very young children as their agents, as their runners for setting up new drug distribution networks in places like Hatfield. And that's the basis of the police prevention first strategy. When I was talking initially to the police officers about setting this up, they said to me, the chief inspector who runs Hatfield Police Station said, there are certain groups of vulnerable children in this area, if we don't get a relationship with them by the age of 8 or 9 years old, it's too late, because the county lines guys have already been there. So it's that important to do it. So that kind of brings us to the wonderful Hatfield Police Station, which you see here. Now, I don't know if you've got any students of architecture among us, but you'll notice that it's a rather horrible modern building, flanked on either side by quite nice older buildings. As indeed it is, the older buildings being 1930s Art Deco. Take a look at the one out to the right there. You can see it in a bit more detail. And that was it when it was built in 1933 as the headquarters building of the de Havilland Aircraft Company. That's what Hatfield did. It was one of the centres of the UK's aviation industry. The de Havilland Aircraft Company, set up by these two gentlemen here, Geoffrey de Havilland on the left and his lifelong friend, colleague, business partner and also brother-in-law, Frank Hurl, on the right. These two gentlemen in 1908 were working for the London Bus Company, but they weren't very into it. They wanted to design and build aeroplanes instead. So Geoffrey borrowed £1,000 from his grandfather, and they set up and they designed and built their own flying machine, which crashed. So they went and built another one instead, which worked. They got better, they taught themselves how to fly. During the First World War, they both worked for different companies, but after the First World War, they came back again because Geoffrey had managed to raise the capital to start his own aviation company, designing and building aeroplanes for the boom in aviation that happened through the 1920s. He wasn't in Hatfield at the time, he was in Edgware, in North London, Northwest London. But through the 1920s, A, he got so successful at building airplanes, and B, Edgware got cramped in with housing estates all around it. It wasn't viable to have an aerodrome anymore in Edgware, so he moved out to Hatfield. And of course, when you're going to do that, when you move out, have a nice new factory, you need a nice big corporate HQ, hence the lovely Art Deco building. There's the frontage of it there. That's the middle of that building there. It was a building built to impress, you know, 1930s, you're going to go for state-of-the-art architecture, Art Deco, big name over the top, nice doors in the front. Through those doors walked some very, very famous people, King George VI, Queen Elizabeth, Winston Churchill, Howard Hughes, Amy Johnson, everybody like that. Me last week as well. It's a building there to show who's boss, really. It sits in the middle, or sat in the middle of what was the factory. There's the big frontage there. It's got a lovely Art Deco pond out there, which still there today. And all out the back, there's a big factory, and beyond the factory, there's the aerodrome. Fantastic place, really, really big industrial complex in 1930. Now, I'm not here to do you a talk on the history of the de Havilland Aircraft Company. If you want to know that, come and see me afterwards, book a later train home or skip dinner or something like that, because we will be here till about 2 o'clock in the morning. Suffice to say that it was de Havilland Aircraft Company until the very end of the 50s. It became part of the Hawker Siddeley Group after that, and then merged into British Aerospace in the 1970s. By the time we get to the 1990s, it's a huge, great place. Still in Hatfield, obviously. We've got a runway now because that was built for the world's first jet airliner, de Havilland Comet, in 1949. You can see all the amount of factories because that is the original buildings there. And it's right, instead of being at the edge, it's right in the middle now. Huge, great place. But 1990s, the aviation industry as a whole has got quite a lot of problems. And British Aerospace decided that Hatfield was one of the sites they had to close. Net result, most of the buildings got demolished, all the factories got demolished and knocked down to make way for housing and light industry. The runway got grubbed up and the concrete was used as hardcore to build all the other buildings. Here is the building on the other side of that modern building in the police station. That was the staff canteen and the senior staff restaurant, which was even fitted out as a fully fledged ballroom with a stage at one end up the top, and that just became derelict. This taken the early noughties really. The whole place was derelict. The vandals got in and so forth. Windows got broken, but then along came Hertfordshire Constabulary, who decided they needed to expand and build a new police station for Hatfield, and so they turned it into Hatfield Police Station. Here's that same building again, all nicely refurbished now. So the building on the other side of the new atrium, it's not the best photograph actually. I took that a couple of months ago. It doesn't show it in a terribly good light, but it's actually not bad really. They've looked after it. It's obviously a listed building. They've kept the outside very nice. They kept all the windows nice and everything else. And they've even refurbished the pond actually, so the fountains work again now, which is quite nice. We've even got ducks. It's great. So Hatfield, it got a new lease of life. It's one of only 4 buildings on the entire site that was saved. The 2 of the 4 buildings. There's this one, the canteen, which is now a police station. There's one of the hangars, which is now a David Lloyd gym, and there's a small gatehouse building, which to its shame is now part of a KFC, but you can't win everything. That was the building. This really takes us. Where did I get involved? Well, as Emma said earlier on, I used to be the curator of the de Havilland Aircraft Museum, which is just down the road. 2019, 2 uniformed policemen drove up. I think, oh no, they've come for me at last. What have I done? No, they said we want to have a chat because they discovered that underneath this central part here, there was a little 4-room basement, which was used, they believed, as the air raid shelter during the war. It was Geoffrey de Havilland's personal air raid shelter. And they said, we want to turn that into a little museum specifically for primary school children, because we as a police force in the Hatfield community, we do nothing to engage with the community, and especially the young community. It takes you back to the prevention first thing, something we need to do. So what they wanted to do, they wanted to fulfill these 3 needs. They wanted to look at the local history. There's loads of local history here. Just showed you that. STEM subjects. It's a place that built airplanes. What's an airplane? How do you build it? How does it fly? And so forth. And this wonderful thing called British values, which I never did when I was at school, but I've looked it up what it is later on, and I think it's a really good idea. That's actually on the national curriculum of the sort of things you have to do for British values. So respect, liberty, tolerance of other cultures, understanding of the rule of law, respect for democracy, things like that. If you can't do all of those things in a police station that used to be an aircraft factory, where can you? It's great. Which brings us on to the bunker. It's called the bunker because it used to be an air raid shelter. What else are you going to call it? So here we are. The name came last year. We started work last year. It's taken quite a long time, but we're nearly there now. It's got 4 areas to it. It's a tiny, tiny little museum. It would fit comfortably inside this room twice. It's that small, okay? But we've got 4 little rooms. We've got an air raid shelter, first of all. It's the original shelter. We think this is where they used to come in case of an air raid. It's air raid sheltery, basically. It's brick walls, which is actually wallpaper, but hey, it's brick walls. It's corrugated iron. It's sandbags. We've got a lovely, great big TV screen in there. It's a place for It's a place for storytelling. It's a place you can sit children down and tell them what it was all about. Next door to it, we've got the Art Deco room. Now, it's an Art Deco building, so you need an Art Deco room. You tell Tell the children, what's Art Deco? Find out about Art Deco. It's cool, it's great. It's all about shapes, it's all about symmetry, it's all about that sort of thing. Also, it's where we tell the stories of what was this company and why did it need such a great big corporate HQ? Because it was rich and it was successful, because in the 20s everybody wanted to learn to fly. And Amy Johnson was flying to Australia. She was the first person to fly solo to Australia. Everybody thought it was going to be a square-jawed, pipe-smoking British chap who did it, and it was this little slip of a lass from Hull who was a secretary who learned how to fly and flew to Australia. Stories like that. The biggest room of the four is the history room, and it is what it says on the tin. Basically, it's a timeline going all the way around the walls, and it starts with Geoffrey de Havilland and Frank Hill learning to fly, and goes all the way around. Talks about the war, talks about the Comet airliner, talks about Hawker Siddeley, British Aerospace, until the site closes. It's got other little exhibitions in it too. So at this point, we've told the kids, we've told them all about the history, the local history of their area, a little bit maybe about what airplanes do and how they fly. The final wall, the final room is the police room. And this is not a history room. It's where the police will talk about themselves. I won't be going in that room. I will be leaving that to the police officers, police community officers and people, and it's where they will tell the children what they do. This is what we do. This is what we're here for. We're here to look after you. We're here to help you. We're here to protect you. We want your visit here to be a positive one. For most of the children, it will be their first experience of a police station, the first time they set foot in one. That was my brief from the Chief Inspector last year. We want that visit, that first visit, to be a positive experience, but we also want to give them the message that we're here to help you, but you've got to help yourselves. You've got to stay on the right side of the law. Listen to your teachers, listen to your parents, listen to us, because if you step off the beaten track, if you step out of line, you will be back here, but your next visit to Hatfield Police Station may not involve a visit to the museum and a free badge and a free biro at the end of it. So there we are. So that's the kind of message. But it's a fun place. You know, we've got handcuffs and we've got fingerprinting and we've got radios and we've got helmets to try on and things like that. So it's a fun place where the kids can find out. Along the way, we've got a few special themes and special stories. If you go through the history of de Havilland, it was a fantastic company. There's all sorts of fun stuff goes along the way. Amy Johnson, you can't do a museum like this without Amy Johnson. She was a pioneer in so many senses of the word. She was one of the first female engineers. She's the first female aircraft engineer in the country. She flew solo to Australia. She did all sorts of other stuff. The Mosquito up the top, it was the wooden wonder. It was a plane built during World War II, almost entirely out of wood, so as not to use up precious aluminium. And it was a brilliant airplane into the bargain. De Havilland Propellers sounds a bit funny, really, because it was a little offshoot company that made propellers before the war. And after the war, it went on to build rockets and missiles. It went on to build the Blue Streak, which was the rocket that was going to carry Britain's nuclear weapon into battle. And eventually got cancelled, but it was used for other things. It was used for launching satellites and things like that. Great stories. We also tell the story of the shady character at the bottom. I don't know if you know who he is. He's Agent Zigzag, Eddie Chapman. He was a British double agent. He was parachuted in. He was trained up in Germany, parachuted back into England with a mission brief to blow up the de Havilland aircraft factory. Turned himself into the police on arrival. He said, "I've come here to blow up the de Havilland aircraft factory." And the Secret Service says, "That's cool, let's go and do it then." Not really, but they actually, using theatrical tricks and stage tricks and things like that, they deceived the Germans into thinking that he'd succeeded. Brilliant story, kids will love it, all of that sort of thing. So that's what we do. Who are we going to do it with? Well, we've talked, there's a lot of these presentations today have touched on the sort of people underprivileged, people on the margins, and we're talking here particularly about young primary age kids, 8 or 9 year old children. There's an organisation called The Hub. It's for young pupils. They're not quite excluded from school yet, but they're not actually that far off. These people need very close intervention, a bit of access, a bit of help, really, maybe even on a one-to-one basis. We might even just have 2 of these children down at one time with 2 supervisors and 2 of us, because they're vulnerable. If they're so close to being led off the beaten track, we want to really focus on them and say, look, come and have a look at this. What do you think of it? It doesn't have to be this way. You too can, get back and get yourself together. Pupil premium pupils, the pupil premium, I expect we're familiar with. It's a government fund for children who need a little bit of extra help. Funding is available to take these pupil premium kids on school trips, things like that, where funding might, they haven't necessarily got parents that could put their hands in their pockets to help them, but they can get access to a thing like this through the pupil premium. We look forward to welcoming people like that. There's a thing called the virtual school, and this is for children who may not go to regular full-time mainstream school. They may be in care, something like that. They may be in the care of the local authority. They may never have been to a thing like that. They may never have been able to go on any school trip of any description whatsoever because they're in care, because of who they are, because of what their background is. And again, you can get them almost on a one-to-one basis and say, hey, come round, have a look at this. What do you reckon to that? You two could get interested. If this is something that floats your boat, you two could get interested. You could end up doing something like this. Then there's this bunch of renegades here called the mini police. The one in the middle, I don't think is a mini police. I think he knows on there. But it's a school activity. It's things done by the police community support officers. It's for 8 to 11-year-olds. And basically the police go into the schools and they talk about the job and they get to dress up in all the kit and everything else. But if we've got a resource like this, you don't just go out to the schools and do it. You get the schools in. You get the mini police in to the real police station for visits, for activities, for things like that, for meetings. Why wouldn't you? It's there. It's a resource. We've got to use it. There's all sorts of things in the wider community too. It doesn't just stop at the children. I want to see it. It's been a bit of a challenge in writing the interpretation material because for the young children, for primary school age children, you do it in one way and the notices are down about there. And then when you have adult groups, you can use slightly different language and all the notices can be up there and things like that. But I want to make it accessible to everybody. I want to make it accessible. Obviously the Cubs, the Brownies, and so forth are an extension of the primary school groups we've talked about. But there's local history groups, there's the U3A, there's the Probus, there's all sorts of other people who are lining up and they all know about it. They just want to come in and have a look because these people too have a reason, they have a right to come in and have a look at their police station. Summed up by our education lead. I'm the collections lead for this. I'm the curator. I look after the collections and the bits. We have a police lead, obviously, who's the chief inspector that runs Hatfield Police Station. And Deborah Massey is a former local primary school head teacher, and she's our education lead. We just want to, there's stuff going on already, with the hub, with the virtual schools, with the mini police, with things like that. But we just want to take it a stage further because it's something that has grated with the police for a long time, as the former chief inspector said to me. He said, most police stations are just a police station. It's a building full of coppers and a cell or two underneath, so forth. This is not an ordinary police station. It's a police station that's got history going back nearly 100 years. We've got a story to tell. We don't tell it. We don't bring the community into our police station at all for any reason, and we should. This is our chance to do so. So really that's it. It's a tiny, like I say, 2 of them in here, no bother at all. Get another one in the room next door too. They're tiny little rooms. I'd love to get aeroplanes down there and engines and stuff like that, but I can't. So it's 2D interpretation. It's a few models. It's things like that. You're delighted that I am getting another missile. Emma and I have history about guided weapons and her giving me stuff and so forth. And I am getting a ground-to-air missile into Hatfield Police Station the week after next. Bring it on, yeah. Yeah, great. But it will all be, it's wow factor for kids. It's stuff that they've got to see because you want to do that, basically. Now, I'm an engineer. I spent a lifetime in engineering before I ended up in the museums business. It's great, but I am basically an engineer. I want to see all these kids come out being engineers. Great. If they want to come out being police officers, I'm okay with that. I am not okay with them being criminals. Okay, so that's what we're going. That's the aim of it. Now, Geoffrey de Havilland, Sir Geoffrey de Havilland, died in 1965. He never saw the end of his factory. It was always a factory there. He never saw the end of it, which is probably fortunate. But if he was to have seen it, if he was to see it as it is now, see it as Hatfield Police Station and seeing what we're doing in there, I think he'd be quite happy with that. What do you think? Don't know. Thank you very much.